Dr. Rebecca Sterling adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses and stared at the mountain of research papers scattered across her desk. The Columbia University Neuroscience Lab hummed quietly around her, but she barely noticed the familiar sounds of equipment and distant conversations. For the past 6 months, she had been consumed by a fascinating pattern emerging from her oxytocin studies. The data was undeniable. Participants who received brief, appropriate physical contact during stressful tasks showed remarkable improvements in cortisol levels, heart rate variability, and overall emotional regulation. Touch, it seemed, was far more powerful than most people realized. Yet here she sat, surrounded by evidence of human connections, healing power, feeling more isolated than ever. 3 years had passed since her divorce from Michael, and Rebecca had built an impressive fortress of professional achievement around herself. She published papers, attended conferences, and earned respect from colleagues worldwide. But she rarely touched another human being beyond the occasional handshake. Even her elderly mother complained that Rebecca had become cold as a fish during their monthly phone calls. The irony wasn't lost on her. She studied the neurochemistry of bonding while systematically avoiding bonds herself. Her research revealed how therapeutic touch activated the parasympathetic nervous system, reducing inflammation and boosting immune function. Meanwhile, she caught every seasonal virus that swept through the university and relied on prescription sleep aids to quiet her racing mind each night. Rebecca picked up a particularly compelling study from Stanford. Participants who received supportive touch during medical procedures required less pain medication and healed faster. The physiological benefits were measurable and consistent. Touch triggered cascades of beneficial hormones while suppressing stress chemicals that wreaked havoc on human health. She made a decision that would change everything. Her next research proposal would be different, more personal somehow. Instead of observing from behind one-way glass, she wanted to understand what her subjects actually experienced. Method demanded objective distance, but maybe some questions required a more participatory approach. Rebecca began typing her grant application with unusual excitement. She would recruit participants for a longitudinal study on therapeutic touch protocols for stress management in academic settings. University environment provided the perfect laboratory, chronically stressed graduate students and faculty. Dealing with constant pressure, she would develop specific touch interventions, brief shoulder touches during difficult conversations, congratulatory embraces after achievements, supportive hand contact during challenging moments. The proposal flowed easily, but as she wrote about the methodology, Rebecca realized she was describing something she had never truly experienced herself. How could she design effective touch interventions when she instinctively recoiled from physical contact? Her research would require a co-investigator, someone naturally comfortable with appropriate physical affection, who could help develop and implement the protocols. She needed someone whose warmth could balance her analytical coldness, someone who understood both the science and the human element she had been missing. As Rebecca submitted her grant application that evening, she wondered if she was really researching human connection or desperately seeking it for herself. The hypothesis was simple. Therapeutic touch could measurably improve human well-being. Testing it, however, might prove more complicated than any experiment she had ever conducted. Dante Rodriguez bounded into the neuroscience lab with his characteristic energy, a steaming cup of coffee in one hand and his worn leather messenger bag slung over his shoulder. At 24, he possessed the kind of natural warmth that made people feel instantly comfortable. Growing up as the middle child in a boisterous Puerto Rican family of 7, physical affection had been as natural as breathing. Quick hugs, shoulder pats, and animated gestures were simply part of communication. "Dr. Sterling?" called out, spotting the reserved professor hunched over her computer in the corner office. "I'm here about the research assistant position." Rebecca looked up, immediately noting how Dante's presence seemed to fill the sterile lab space with life. His easy smile and relaxed posture contrasted sharply with the rigid formality she maintained with most students. She had interviewed 6 candidates for the position, all technically qualified but somehow lacking the interpersonal qualities her study would require. "Please sit down." Rebecca gestured to the chair across from her desk, careful to maintain professional distance. "I've reviewed your application. Your background in behavioral psychology is impressive. But this research will be quite different. From typical academic work, Dante settled into the chair with unconscious grace, leaning forward slightly in genuine interest. The therapeutic touch protocols? I find it fascinating how something so basic to human experience has been so understudied. My family. Touch is just how we show love and support. My abuela always said you could heal people just by holding their hand with real intention. Rebecca felt something shift inside her chest at his words. Here was someone who intuitively understood what she was trying to prove scientifically. The position would involve direct participation in the study. Protocols. You'd be working with stressed graduate students and faculty, implementing various forms of appropriate supportive touch. It requires someone comfortable with physical contact in professional settings. Absolutely. Dante nodded enthusiastically. I've actually been thinking about how isolated academic culture can be. Everyone's so focused on individual achievement that we forget humans are fundamentally social creatures. Your research could really help people. During their conversation, Rebecca noticed how naturally Dante expressed himself through gesture and positioning. When making a point, he might briefly touch his chest or lean forward engagingly. His body language was open and warm without being inappropriate. She found herself relaxing slightly, her usual tension easing in response to his genuine demeanor. Should mention, Rebecca said carefully, this study will require meticulous documentation. We'll be measuring cortisol levels, heart rate variability, and subjective well-being reports. The physical interventions must be standardized and appropriate. Of course, Dante agreed, though I hope we can balance the scientific rigor with authentic human connection. Sometimes the most important things can't be fully captured in data, you know? Rebecca paused, considering his words. In her years of research, she had always prioritized measurable outcomes over subjective experiences. But maybe this study needed both perspectives, her analytical precision and his intuitive understanding of human warmth. When can you start? She asked, surprising herself with the quickness of her decision. Dante's face lit up with a genuine smile that reached his eyes. Tomorrow, if you need me. I'm excited to help prove what my family has always known, that caring touch can heal. More than just physical wounds. As he left the lab that afternoon, Rebecca realized she had just hired someone who embodied everything her research aimed to understand. Working with Dante would either validate her theories about therapeutic touch or reveal uncomfortable truths about her own emotional isolation. For the first time in years, she looked forward to coming to work. Dr. Amara Okafor pushed through the lab doors, carrying 2 cups of coffee, her keen eyes immediately scanning for her closest colleague. She found Rebecca hunched over a stack of preliminary data sheets, more animated than Amara had seen her in months. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. Rebecca's usually rigid posture had relaxed, and there was an energy about her that hadn't been present since before the divorce. Burning the midnight oil again? Amara asked, settling into the familiar chair beside Rebecca's desk. Their Friday evening coffee tradition had started 3 years ago, when Rebecca needed support during her separation, and it had become their weekly check-in ritual. The preliminary results are remarkable, Amara. Rebecca looked up with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. Participants in the therapeutic touch condition show a 23% reduction in cortisol levels compared to the control group. Heart rate variability has improved across the board, and the subjective well-being scores are through the roof. Mara studied her friend's face carefully. As a clinical psychologist, she was trained to notice emotional subtleties that others missed. Rebecca's excitement seemed genuine. There was something else lurking beneath, a heightened energy that felt almost manic. That's wonderful, Rebecca. Tell me about your research assistant, Dante, right? He seems to be working out well, Rebecca's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a brief softening around her eyes. He's exceptional. His intuitive understanding of appropriate supportive touch has been invaluable in developing our protocols. The participants respond to him naturally. And how are you finding the hands-on aspect of this research? It's quite different from your usual observational studies. Rebecca hesitated, her fingers absently adjusting her already perfect stack of papers. It's been illuminating. I'm gaining insights into the participant experience that wouldn't be possible from behind observation glass. Amara leaned forward slightly, her clinical instincts engaging. Rebecca, Are you participating in the touch protocols yourself? Question hung in the air between them. Rebecca's cheeks flushed slightly, and she looked away toward the window overlooking the campus quad. To some degree, yes, for research purposes. I need to understand what the participants experience to design effective interventions, I see. Amara kept her voice neutral, but internally, alarm bells were ringing. She had watched Rebecca build emotional walls for 3 years, systematically isolating herself after Michael left. The sudden shift toward physical intimacy in a professional setting raised serious concerns. How often are you and Dante implementing these protocols together? Amara asked carefully. Daily, sometimes multiple times throughout our work sessions. Depending on stress levels and research needs, Rebecca's voice carried a defensive edge. It's all documented and appropriate, Amara. We're following strict ethical guidelines. Amara nodded thoughtfully. I'm sure you are. Just that you seem different lately. More energetic, but also more volatile. Yesterday you snapped at the department secretary over a minor scheduling issue. That's not like you. Rebecca's jaw tightened. I'm fine. This research is important, and I'm committed to doing it properly. I know you are, Amara said gently. But sometimes when we've been emotionally deprived for a long time, any form of connection can feel overwhelming. The line between research and personal need can blur without us realizing it. You think I've lost professional objectivity? Rebecca's voice was sharp now. I think you're human, Amara replied. Humans need connection. There's no shame in that. But mixing personal needs with professional research can create complications you might not be prepared for. Rebecca stood abruptly, gathering her papers with jerky movements. I appreciate your concern, but this study is progressing exactly as planned. The results speak for themselves. As Rebecca left the lab that evening, Amara remained in her chair, deeply troubled. Her friend was exhibiting classic signs of emotional dependency, masked as professional dedication. The question was whether Rebecca could recognize the pattern, before it derailed both her research and her emotional well-being. Some variables, Amara knew, were harder to control than others. Professor James Whitfield drummed his fingers against his mahogany desk. Reviewing the concerning email from the university's ethics review board, as department head, he had seen his share of research complications, but Rebecca Sterling's case was particularly delicate. 3 separate colleagues had expressed concerns about her increasingly erratic behavior, and apparent over-involvement with her graduate assistant. A sharp knock interrupted his thoughts. Come in, Rebecca entered with her characteristic precision, but James noticed the subtle changes Amara had mentioned. Her usually immaculate appearance showed small signs of distress-wrinkled blouse, slightly trembling hands, and an intensity in her eyes that seemed barely contained. You wanted to see me about my research? Rebecca settled into the chair across from his desk, her posture defensive. Rebecca, I need to address some concerns that have been brought to my attention regarding your therapeutic touch study. James kept his voice measured and professional. Several faculty members have observed what they describe as inappropriate. Boundary crossing between you and your research assistant. Rebecca's face flushed. That's ridiculous. Every interaction is documented and falls within approved protocols. The research is yielding groundbreaking results on the neurophysiology of supportive touch. I'm not questioning your scientific rigor, James said carefully. But Dr. Martinez mentioned seeing you and Dante in prolonged physical contact after hours in the lab. Dr. Peterson observed what appeared to be personal rather than professional embraces in the hallway. These observations raise questions about dual relationships. Those were research-related interactions, Rebecca insisted, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. Dante is helping me understand the participant experience firsthand. You can't study human connection from a purely observational stance. James leaned forward. Rebecca, I've known you for 8 years. You're one of our most methodical researchers. This level of personal involvement is completely unlike you. I'm concerned that your own emotional needs may be influencing your professional judgment. Rebecca's composure cracked slightly. Right. My personal life is not the university's concern. It becomes our concern when it affects research integrity and potentially creates exploitation of a power differential with a graduate student, James replied firmly. I'm not accusing you of intentional misconduct, but the appearance of impropriety is almost as damaging as actual violations. Dante is a willing participant. He understands the research goals. That's exactly the problem, James sighed. Graduate students often feel pressure to comply with faculty requests, even when they're uncomfortable. The power dynamic makes true consent questionable. Rebecca stood abruptly. Are you shutting down my research? Recommending a temporary suspension while we conduct a review? James said. You'll need to submit to counseling sessions with our employee assistance program. Any future contact with Dante must be supervised and limited to professional interactions only. This is destroying months of important work, Rebecca's voice rose. The participants are showing remarkable improvements. You're letting institutional paranoia override scientific progress. James watched her carefully. Rebecca, when was the last time you had meaningful physical contact with another person outside of this research? The question hit like a physical blow. Rebecca felt her breath catch, realizing how exposed her motivations had become. The truth was devastating. She couldn't remember the last time. Someone had touched her with genuine affection before this study began. This isn't about my personal needs, she whispered. But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. I think it's exactly about that, James said gently. And there's nothing wrong with needing human connection. But using your position to meet those needs through a subordinate crosses ethical lines, regardless of your intentions. Rebecca sank back into her chair, the weight of realization crushing her carefully constructed defenses. Everything James was saying was true. She had used her research as a cover for her own desperate need for touch and connection, potentially exploiting Dante's natural warmth and professional vulnerability. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now we figure out how to help you separate your personal healing from your professional responsibilities, James replied. Your research has genuine merit, Rebecca, but it needs to continue without you using it to meet your own unaddressed emotional needs. The correlation between her professional success and personal emptiness had never been clearer. Luna Chen sat across from Rebecca in the small faculty counseling office, her weathered hands wrapped around a cup of jasmine tea. At 6 to 8, Luna had seen countless researchers struggle with the blurred lines between personal investment and professional objectivity. Her own groundbreaking work in attachment theory had emerged from her efforts to understand her own childhood trauma, making her uniquely qualified to guide Rebecca through this crisis. Tell me about the moment you realized your feelings had changed, Luna said gently, her voice carrying decades of wisdom and compassion. Rebecca stared out the window, watching students cross the autumn campus. 2 weeks had passed since her suspension, 2 weeks of mandatory counseling and painful self-reflection. It was during a late evening in the lab. Dante placed his hand on my shoulder while we were reviewing data, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete calm. Like I could finally breathe properly. And that frightened you? Should have, Rebecca admitted. Instead, I became addicted to that feeling. I started creating excuses to work late with him, to initiate physical contact. I told myself it was research, but I was lying to everyone, including myself. Luna nodded thoughtfully. Your feelings weren't a failure of scientific objectivity, Rebecca. They were proof of your hypothesis. You needed connection. And when you finally experienced appropriate, caring touch, your nervous system responded. Exactly as your research predicted. Rebecca looked up, surprised. But I exploited a power differential. I used my position to meet my own emotional needs.
Yes.
And that was wrong, Luna agreed. But understanding why it happened can help both your personal healing and your research. You weren't a predator taking advantage. You were a touch-starved person who finally experienced what your own studies proved humans need to thrive. Dante has been so understanding, Rebecca said quietly. He doesn't blame me, but I can see how confused he is. He genuinely cared about the research and about helping me understand connection. I turned that generosity into something complicated. Luna set down her teacup. What if I told you there was a way to honor both your research and your feelings without compromising either? I don't understand. Your study produced remarkable results because it was real. Participants responded positively because they experienced authentic care, not just clinical intervention. The human element you brought to the research, even inappropriately, was actually its greatest strength. Rebecca considered this. But the ethical violations, can be addressed through proper channels and safeguards, Luna finished. I'm recommending that you continue your research with a different team structure. Dante can remain involved if he chooses, but with clear boundaries and additional oversight. Most importantly, you need to address your own need for connection. Outside the professional setting, I don't know how, Rebecca admitted. I've been isolated for so long. Luna smiled warmly. The same way your research participants learned through gradual, appropriate exposure to caring human contact. I'm recommending you join our faculty support group for divorce professionals. We meet weekly, and yes, we believe in the healing power of appropriate physical affection. Over the following months, Rebecca rebuilt both her research program and her personal life with careful attention to boundaries and ethics. Her study on therapeutic touch became a model for participant-centered research, incorporating the authentic human elements that made it effective while maintaining professional integrity. Dante chose to continue working with the research team under new supervision structures. Their professional relationship remained warm but clearly defined, and Rebecca learned to appreciate his contributions without confusing them with personal, emotional support. Most importantly, Rebecca discovered that her hypothesis had been correct all along. Humans do need appropriate physical connection to thrive. She had simply needed to learn the difference between using research to meet personal needs and conducting research that honored both scientific rigor and human authenticity. The touch that had once threatened to derail her career ultimately taught her the most important lesson of all, that understanding human connection required experiencing it properly, with appropriate boundaries, mutual consent, and genuine care. Sometimes the best research emerges not from detached observation, but from the courage to participate in the human experience we seek to understand.